Well, good morning, everyone. The last couple of weeks I've been in some other churches, and I'll tell you what, getting back to our services here, we are really, I should say spoiled, but maybe the better word would be blessed by our choir and orchestra. And I'm going to ask you to help me thank you again. I'm sitting back there as the choir is singing and the orchestra is playing, and then I'm watching someone, they're not actually on their horns, they're singing right along, all right? And then at some of the highlight portions, they're pointing at the music and whatnot, so I know they enjoy the songs, and that lifts their hearts as much as ours. I really appreciate the work that they put into it for helping us worship the Lord. I'm filling the pulpit this morning. Stephen came down with a horrible cold. It's not the virus, it's a cold. It's affecting his throat. Like he just texted me, said, my voice is in the cellar this morning, all right? And by the way, if you're in Greenhouse, he is planning on doing that this evening. He's hoping to do that, but then during that, he can make the class do some of the talking, all right? So this morning, I'll be filling in the pulpit. 2 weeks ago, yesterday, my wife and I had an opportunity to visit with a granddaughter. Several of us from the seminary on a Monday and Tuesday, just a week and a half or so ago, were on the campus of a college down in Florida, Trinity College, with the possibility of opening up a teaching site. So we took administrators and 4 faculty members, and we did presentations to pastors of the area. Lucy and I decided we would go down earlier, go down a Friday and a Saturday, and travel down to visit our oldest grandchild, our granddaughter, who's in college down in a Christian college majoring in education. She's a sophomore in Palm Beach, Florida. And so we went down there, and then on Saturday morning, we had opportunity to visit with her on Friday. Saturday morning, we went for coffee to a coffee shop, and then she mentioned there's this great outdoor market that ends in a park, and you can walk the streets between all the upscale restaurants and, dining places, and it was upscale, okay? Palm Beach, it's upscale, all right? So we went there, and then it got to be about noon, and soon we're going to have to head back up to the Tampa Clearwater area, and so let's grab a quick lunch. Did you catch that word? A quick lunch. So we went to a really nice restaurant, bistro area, and as we're walking up, there's all the outdoor tables, and as we approach the restaurant, it's really crowded. But it is really well known and known for its great food. So we go in expecting to get seated right away, but there's people everywhere. And so, but because we're 3 of us, the waitress says, I have a 3 table. A lot of 4 people, 5 people and more are waiting, and it's like, hey, we're getting in right away. So they seat us at a bistro table. Right next to the window, right behind us is the serving desk, so we're crowded into an area. Lucy's sitting across, the table's not much bigger than half of this pulpit. Lucy's there. My granddaughter, Hallie's here, and I'm right here, and the window's right here. And we don't get served right away. So I'm a little, okay, I can't wait. So I go and I get our own menus, sit them right there. But I'm looking outside and I'm looking at all these tables and the food they're bringing. They go, I want that, I think I want that, I think I want that. And it was terrific. Finally, somebody comes, a great young server, just pleasant, walks us through some of the specialties that they're having that day, etc. Then they go to prepare it. And during that time, I'm looking, it's starting to get late. And I'm getting a little, how long is it going to take them to make this? All right. But then they bring the chicken and waffles, which was the house specialty. Probably the best I have to be a little careful here on my doctor's in the house, and so, but it was awesome. Okay. But during the wait, which got to be almost a half hour before our food came, I'm complaining, but where are they? What are they doing? My granddaughter, who's has one of these backpacks, I guess college students, all of them wear backpacks, but she's got this little leather backpack. She says, hey, Papa, have you read a book that's out recently? And it has to deal with hurrying, okay? And so over the years, the Lord used my wife as my sense of reason and conscience, and now we're down to grandkids, all right? But I came across a book that she read. So she reaches into her briefcase and pulls out this bright orange book. And it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Now, some of you are going to ask me about it. I haven't finished reading it, okay? But she's pointed out a couple of stats, and she said, you might want to read a couple of these pages. So I picked it up, and I turned to page, she had it highlighted, page 21. Listen as I read from John Mark Comer, who was a megachurch pastor who stepped out of the megachurch pastor to take one of the sites that he started to. The church was getting 7,000 to 10,000, and he wanted to bring it, he wanted a slower life. He writes this. The number one problem you will face is time. People are just too busy to live emotionally healthy and spiritually rich and vibrant lives. What do people normally answer when you ask the customary question, how are you? Here's their response, he writes, oh, good, comma, just really what? Busy. Next page. Michael Zigarelli from the Charleston Southern University School of Business conducted the Obstacles to Growth survey with over 20,000 Christians across the globe and identified busyness as a major distraction from spiritual life. Zigarelli writes, it may be the case that, number one, Christians are assimilating to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to, number two, God becoming more marginalized in Christians' lives, which leads to, number three, a deteriorating relationship with God, which leads eventually to, number four, Christians becoming even more vulnerable to adopting secular assumptions about how to live, which leads to, ultimately, number five, more conformity to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, and we keep repeating the cycle. I skipped several pages. We hear the refrain, I'm great, just busy. So often we assume pathological busyness is okay. After all, everybody else is busy too, right? But what if busyness isn't healthy? What if it's an airborne contagion wreaking havoc to our collective soul? Again, we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. For many of us, he writes, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith, it's that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of life. We just skim our lives instead of actually living them. And then he goes into a chapter of a brief history of speed. I skip a couple of pages. Most historians, he writes, point to 1370 as the turning point in history in the West's relationship to time. 1370 was the year the first public clock tower was erected in Cologne, Germany. Before that, time was natural. It was linked to the rotation of the earth on its axis and the four seasons. Days, you went to bed with the moon and you got up with the sun. Days were long and busy in summer, short and slow in winter. There was a rhythm to the day and even the year. Then, in 1879, you had Edison and the light bulb, which made it possible to stay up past sunset. Okay, brace yourself for the next stat, he writes. Before Edison, in the 1870s, the average person slept 11 hours a night. Yes, he writes, 11. I used to read biographies of great men and women from history who got up to pray at 4 o'clock in the morning. John Wesley, Charles Spurgeon, and he goes through a whole list. I often thought, wow, they are way more spiritual about living and serving Jesus than I am. True, but then I realized they went to bed at 7 o'clock, and after 9 hours of sleep, then he goes on. Now, at least in America, we're down to about 7 hours as the median number of hours of sleep per night. That's 2.5 less hours of sleep than just a century ago. Examples are legion. He's talking about hurrying. We used to walk everywhere. Now we have cars to get from place to place in a hurry. We used to make all of our food from scratch. Now we have takeout. We used to write letters. Now we email. Yet in spite of our smartphones and programmable coffee pots and dishwashers, laundry machines and toasters, most of us feel like we have less time, not more. Labor-saving devices really do save time. So where did all that time go? Answer, we spent it on other things. In 1960s, the Senate held subcommittees in the United States to study this. A Senate subcommittee in 1967 was told that by the year 1985, the average American would work only 22 hours a week for 27 weeks a year. Everybody thought the main problem in the future would be too much leisure time. Couple more paragraphs. The exact opposite has happened. Leisure time has gone down. Today, the average American works nearly 4 more weeks per year than they did in 1979. Our culture never even slowed down long enough to ask, what will this new pace of life do to our souls? All of this reached a climax in 2007. When the history books are written, they will point to 2007 as an inflection point on par with the year 1440. And 1440, of course, is the year that Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, which set the stage for the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, which together transformed Europe and our world. And 2007, then he says, give me a drum roll. That's the year Steve Jobs released the iPhone into the world. The internet alone has changed the world, and not just for the better. Depending on who you talk to, it's decreasing our IQs, or at least our capacity to pay attention. And the smartphone put that internet right into our pockets. A recent study found that the average iPhone user touches his or her iPhone 2,617 times a day. Each user is on his or her iPhone for 2.5 hours over 76 sessions per day. By the way, they track that. And that's just for the average smartphone users. Another study on millennials has put the number at twice that. In every study I've read or researched, most people surveyed said they had no clue how much time they actually lost on their phones. Cue another terrifying trend. Our attention span is dropping with each passing year. In the year 2000, before the digital revolution, it was on average 12 seconds. But since then, it's dropped today, to the 2020s now, to 8 seconds. To put things in perspective, a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. He writes, yes, that's right, we're losing out to goldfish. But the odds are not in our favor. There are literally thousands of apps and devices intentionally engineered to steal your attention and with it your money. Reminder, your phone isn't actually working for you. You paid for it. But it works for a multi-million-dollar corporation. You're not the customer, you're the product. They sell your attention along with your peace of mind. James Williams called the tech industry the largest, most standardized, and most centralized form of attention control in human history. And then I'm going to close with his last couple of paragraphs of this chapter. It's easy just to assume this pace of life is normal. It's not. Time famine we grew up with is a relatively recent phenomenon. We still are testing it out. And the early results are terrifying. To summarize, after millennia of slow, gradual acceleration, in recent decades, the sheer velocity of our culture has reached an exponential fever pitch. My question is simple. What is all this distraction, addiction, and pace of life doing to our souls? I live by a schedule. Just like you, I plan my life, as most of us do. We plan, we schedule, we hurry, we're busy. Why? I believe because we live by routines and we're comfortable when we can keep those routines, and it gives us management and control over our lives. But when something unexpected or unplanned occurs, I find I become impatient. Remember the restaurant? I become irritated, upset, confused, and we need to blame someone. You know, this morning I'm driving in here, and I'm following as I'm coming down Holly Springs Road from 1010, and I'm making my way down. I get behind a pickup, and he's got furniture in it, in a Toyota Tacoma, and he's pulling a trailer. It's obvious he's moving furniture. But why in front of me? Okay? I'm in a hurry. Now, lest you think I got up late, I got up 3 hours earlier. Had coffee, my devotions, time with prayer, with my wife. But I'm in a hurry nonetheless. And then when we get closer to church, he doesn't pull out of my lane. Okay? And so, I'm in a hurry. I live that way. I don't have time for this. Or you're in a hurry and you pull up to the grocery store to load up your groceries because you don't have time to spend, so you place the order on your computer. You pull up, but there's 3 cars in front of you. I don't have time. I didn't see this coming. I didn't plan for this. They told me on the phone the pizza would be here in 45 minutes when we ordered it. And I've got several others of us as college students sitting here. It's been 30 minutes. Where is it? All right? Do you understand how we live like that? That's the pace of our lives. And when it happens, we ask, why me? Why now? But on a larger scale, what about when life's plans don't go at all as we anticipated? I call those change of life plans. I want you to go with me to the Old Testament. Normally I preach on the Gospels or with the apostles when Stephen's out of the pulpit, but he's in the Gospel of Luke right now and covering the apostles well. I want to go to an Old Testament passage, Exodus chapter 14, 1 through 14, dealing with those confusing, I'm going to call them detours, life-changing episodes in our life. And one of them occurs here in Exodus 14. I recently preached in chapel and chose this passage, but since then my granddaughter came on the scene and the Holy Spirit spoke through her to my heart, okay? And I have been in Exodus now for 6 weeks and cannot leave it. God's doing something there that I've never seen before in my life, and I've preached through it as a senior pastor. But there's one chapter that just arrests my attention, all right? And I want you to go there with me. And we're going to see as we deal with some of these distractions in life. I want to read a paragraph, and I've already read quite a bit. I promise I will get us out here on time. But I need to read from a commentary that I've been using. Doug Stewart wrote a 2-volume commentary, and this is volume number 2. And he's got an introductory paragraph or 2 dealing with this episode. I want you to listen as I read it. I can't say it better than he does, so I'm going to read it. If you need to, just close your eyes and listen for a moment. And he writes this: the Israelites had much to learn. They had just begun to leave Egypt, where they had been for so long leaderless and subjugated that an entire way of thinking tended to reflect that of people who owed their identity to their plight. They knew themselves as victims of the tyranny of the ancient world's greatest contemporary military, economic, political power. They knew one place to live and one place only. That was the Goshen area of northeast Egypt. They had never been allowed military arms or the knowledge of how to use them, even though God had just begun to organize them as a mighty army. They were not used to direct guidance from God. They understood little of the power of His presence among them. So they operated with the usual assumptions of most of us trying to understand the working of God. A good and powerful God would hardly allow his people to go through troubles, dangers, griefs, and testings, would he? Their reasoning led them to naturally think, if God is all-powerful and can oppress the Egyptians through the 10 plagues, while sparing us, his people, he spared us entirely, we can now expect him to take care of all of our wants and desires, just as we defined them, can't we? They're going to go through many events now throughout Exodus and into Numbers. In all these events, however, God was at work to bring his people to a right relationship with him and to teach them dependence on his provision for them. He was shaping and he will educate them, allowing them to learn frequently the hard way, since that is all too often the only way many of us learn a lesson, what it meant to trust God in all sorts of situations. In addition, he was treating them in a way that has always been difficult for people to accept. He was not telling them everything they wanted to know. He told them what they needed to know in order to become his people and in order to receive salvation. They wanted to know much more, however. Where to find water the right way, how much longer this or that would last, how to be comfortable, how to avoid problems and dangers, and how to get out of unpleasant situations. There are 4 truths that I want us to learn from an episode in Exodus 14, 1 through 14, those 14 verses. And so follow along as we unfold them relatively quickly. And that is, number 1 truth. The situations we find ourselves facing are often the results of God's leading. Did you catch that? God often puts us in situations, and God will lead us many times, as he did here. He'll lead us through the word, but he led them by specific command. They're going to find themselves between a rock and a hard place, and it was by God's leading them to that place. I'm going to read verses 1 and 2, but before I do, I'm going to actually start in verse 17 of the previous chapter. He's going to lead them by specific command. Listen to what I read, then I'll read verses 1 and 2. When Pharaoh let the people go after the 10 plagues, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, and they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day or by night. He didn't arrange for a pillar of fire or a cloud to show them. He actually was with them in that. The pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night did not depart from them before the people. Then the Lord, verse 1, said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pahahiroth between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon, and you shall encamp facing it by the sea. They were traveling in one direction, and then God is going to direct them in a southeasterly way. I had a couple of maps, and if the team can bring them up, I'm not sure there. And if you can see this one map, you'll see the dark blue towards the top, and you're going to see a dotted line right below it. Might be relatively hard to see, but that is the Via Maris. And up toward the sea, what you see there is the route that you would normally travel if you were going through Israel or Mesopotamia down to the delta region of Egypt. Egypt, of course, is where it comes all together in that funnel, and then the river, the Nile River. And in between then is the land of Egypt and the desert area. God is going to take them not along that route where they would encounter military forces of the Egyptians, their forts, as well as the Philistines, but he's going to take them southeast, and he's going to take them right towards what looks like that And you can see there's the Sinai Peninsula. That's the big V of land. But then there's a little bitty part there. That's the Red Sea. And he's going to take them to the Red Sea. They were traveling. God changes their direction. He arranges for a course change. Okay, next slide then. I don't know if that'll help at all there. But you can see the dots. They started up at number 1, way up on top. You might not be able to see the number, but that's the topmost dot by the sea. And then they could have gone along the land, right along the Mediterranean. He takes them south. To the Israelites, it may have seemed strange and risky, turning them southeast, right toward the sea. But they didn't know that had they been going, they would have run into Egyptian forces. They did not know had they been going along the route that would have seemed natural, they would have run into more powerful Philistine armies that won't be dealt with until 1 Samuel and under David's leadership. And they didn't know what they were in for. They were headed one way. God changed direction. Why does God do this? For a second reason. The situations we face are often the results of God's leading for his own purposes. Verses 3 and 4. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And so as we read these verses, we said God sometimes leads in difficult places for us to understand for a purpose that he has in mind for us. And what is that? His purposes might be, number 1, to demonstrate the sovereignty of God before unbelievers' eyes. To Pharaoh, it would appear, it was already appearing as if they were wandering, confused and lost. Because in that episode we read, they first traveled, they actually went further south and then came back. It kind of looked like as they were going along, not the popular route, but then they oscillated. Do you understand what I'm saying? They went beyond and then they brought them back. And so it looked like, well, first of all, they don't know where to go. Then they've troubled themselves by even going backwards. And so to the Egyptians who have military forts there, undoubtedly are reporting this to Pharaoh, it looks like these people are completely confused and leaderless in their lives. To demonstrate the power then to God, to unbelievers, but to illustrate the ability of God to care for his children. In verse 4, even before they will cross the Sinai Peninsula, where they're going to have to completely depend on God for food, for water, for everything, he wants to show his children that they can trust him. He can take care of them, protect them, provide for them. God knows what's in their best interest. He knows what's in our best interest, even sometimes if it appears confusing. We go along smoothly in life with that schedule, with those plans. Everything seems okay, at least as we take the look down the road. But God knows the future. We don't. He sees ahead, and he may make a course of change, or a change of course, as it were, in your life. And he has a purpose behind it. See? Are you going through some kind of a conflict, some unusual trial? God may have placed it there, or at least he may permit it, even sometimes if it's a wrong choice. He may allow it in your life for his ultimate purposes, for your ultimate good. We may ask why? Why now? Why me? Why this? And it may be a testimony then to how you go through that, a testimony to your unsaved family, relatives, neighbors, co-workers, fellow students. Happens. I teach in the seminary. I've been doing it now for decades. Seminary students, and you saw this morning, but you see these students. Some of them moved from California. Some of them moved from Ohio, Michigan, the Midwest, the Northeast, the South. They come here. Global staff leave here. You'll hear Rob or you'll hear Steve stand up here and we pray for them, and then they go off, whether it's to London, the Middle East, Africa, South America, Asia. They go off to serve the Lord. And when they're going, they have no idea what they're in for. But they know God wants them to go. I remember years ago, Lucy and I packed up everything we had. I was working working in engineering, etc., back in Minnesota, one of the few students who owned their own home when I started seminary. But we felt it better to finish in Pennsylvania. So we sold it. We sold everything. We put everything into a 24-foot truck, and we hitched up our car to it and went east. Had no idea all of our worldly possessions are in that box in the back, that box truck, and a car. We had no home, no job. And people look at us and wonder, and then things don't go as planned. I didn't get a job right away when we got there. And people wonder then, where's your God now? I remember, though, we had a Saturday event for our family before we left to say goodbye. And I remember relatives thinking, what are you doing to your family? How is this a responsible husband? See? And those people who are our global partners and global staff, they take those kind of risks, don't they? Sometimes as a testimony to you and me of how to live by faith. And you've seen Gary's Kittredge's slides and other things, and you look at it and go, how do they live like that? As a reminder for you and me as well, right? Not to take anything for granted, all right? It's reassuring, though, to know that as long as you follow God, no matter how difficult, you can say that I know that He will care for me. Notice the second episode real quickly. The situations we face are often the occasions when God tests us. And these are in verses 4 through 9. And so let me read the latter part of verse 4, and you'll see that God may test us in the path of obedience. And they did so, that one sentence. While serving God, they are tested, not backslidden, and not out of step with God. This is one of the hardest lessons for you and me to learn. The fact is that you may be a believer who's been saved shortly, saved for a long time, and advancing in your spiritual maturity. But even as you're advancing in your spiritual life, it's no guarantee that you and I will be free from trials, some of those life's detours. Christians, even saved for a long time, get laid off. We lose our jobs too. Christians find themselves can go through a divorce situation that never was planned. We can often do, and we do, experience financial downturns, setbacks. See, the wood of our homes burns as well, doesn't it? All the way to the ground. Whether it be a health decline or cancer or different diseases or a coronavirus or even death can strike our homes as well. We aren't immune from trials. We aren't immune from testings. We may even suffer more than others do. Study church history and look at the history of the church martyrs. That may be us, the ridicule. God has not promised to save us from, but to save us in and to bring us through trials and testings. Isaiah 43 talks about when you go through the fire, you go through the waters. I will be with you. I will bring you through. Why, verse 47? For I have created you for my glory. Affliction, Psalm 119, verse 67. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. Verse 71, it is good that I have been afflicted. Good, tov, is the Hebrew word. Beneficial, profitable to me. Now I will learn thy statutes. See? In the path of obedience, He may test us. He may test us by allowing overwhelming circumstances to overtake us, verses 5 through 9. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, "What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So they made ready his chariot and took his army with him. He took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them, plus the army. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly, and the Egyptians pursued them. All of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, his horsemen, his army, and overtook them and camped at the sea before Pahahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. The children of Israel are waiting on God's leading, and Pharaoh takes the opportunity to try to overcome them, take them back into bondage. While you quietly wait, sometimes even struggle during a testing period, the enemy, the evil one, takes an opportunity to pounce on us, to snare us, to cause us to doubt. So, number 3, truth. Number 1, the situations we find ourselves are often the results of God's leading. The situations we face are often the occasions when God tests us. But then the situations we face are often the occasions when we can fail the Lord. How might we fail him? Verse 10, by our unbelief. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They're alarmed because the situation now seems impossible. You have the Egyptian army on one side, you have a desert on the other, you have an impassable area north of you, and there sits the sea to the east, directly in front of you. Defeat, destruction seems inevitable now. Why? They're not prepared. They're not prepared outwardly for battle. No training, no experience. They've never been here before. They were slaves. They're not people of weapons. They've had no military training. They're not prepared outwardly. They hadn't seen or faced this. Inwardly, they're Egyptian for 400 years, through and through. They look, they act like Egyptians. They smell like Egyptians. Garlic and onions, okay? Not spiritually enough now inwardly, so they cry out. The cry of anxiety, a cry without confidence, of desperation, despair. And so they're failing the Lord. They have no belief. They fail the Lord by their complaints. Then in verses 11 and 12. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better in the good old days to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." I added in the good old days, okay? But as you look at this passage, by their complaints, because of these new circumstances, why me? Why now? Why this in my life? They gave vent to despair. Then they focused their complaints against their leader with words of sarcasm and irony. What's interesting is they had done this earlier. Remember when Moses said to them, "I'll lead you out, let us go." And then Pharaoh said, "Okay, now you make bricks without straw." So in verse 31, chapter 4, 31, they're thankful. By the time we get to chapter 5, 21, they're complaining. Their reaction is typical. It's typical of us. It's typical of me, whose spiritual perspectives can sometimes get clouded by our culture. Without a historical, listen to this, without a historical conscientiousness, in other words, think back to what God has done. Most of us are easily moved by the emotions of any new situation because we live and put emphasis on the present. I thought it would be different now. In tough times, that miserable past that you came out of and turned to Christ so easily now sometimes seems like the good old days. I'm going to put it in perspective. They weren't good back then. That's why we came to God in the first place. That sin life wasn't good when we wanted deliverance. Praise God how he can lead. Don't fail him by doubting. I know, I've lived there. Remember when I said I moved east and we got there? Well, we unpacked that truck. We pulled up to the apartment complex. I never had seen it before. A friend of ours got it for us. It was 3 stories. We're on the 3rd floor, okay? And we have to take our furniture that we had up the 3rd floor. Going in, when we first go in to open the door, there sits a couple of guys sitting on the steps and they're flicking knives. Hey man, how you doing? It's like, and we moved into an apartment that had hot and cold running cockroaches, okay? And I have an 18-month-old, and I'm asking, and I don't have a job, so I ended up, and I've told you the story of working in a slaughtering house. As a chemical engineer, I'm not doing chemical engineering. I'm cleaning up after the cattle. And I am asking God, what have you done to me? What have you done to my family? Who did I blame? My God. The situations we face are opportunities for God to display his greatness. Verse 13, he'll display it at the right moment. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will see never again. Moses met their unbelief and he met their complaints, and God meets our complaints. He issues a 3-fold command here. Number 1, don't be afraid, fear not. Number 2, stand firm, stand still, demonstrate confidence, show maturity in your faith, seek the salvation of the Lord. You will see, raha with the eyes, meaning you're going to actually see God do something. And then what he does is he takes control. Shows his greatness, verse 14. The Lord will fight for you. Only you have to be silent. In other words, Moses didn't say, prepare defenses, let's organize to fight. No. Don't take matters into your hands. Moses reminded them that God would fight for them and care for their safety. He will fight for you when you hold your peace, is how you can translate this. Verse 15. God then says, why do you cry? Lift up the staff, and he does. And he lifts up his staff, and he says, I'll harden the heart of Pharaoh. And as he lifts it up, then God begins to do what only God can do. Greatest miracle of the Old Testament. The east wind blew. The east wind that had brought the plagues, remember the locusts and the others? Same east wind. It now blows. And that water stands up like walls. And I don't know what God did, if he did something using nature and froze it and made it so that it could be like ice that they could see through. Well, they're going to walk through a corridor that's warm, and yet there's ice. I like to think of ice high. And it says like a wall. And the walls of the ancient cities were at least 20 to 30 feet high. Those walls, that wall of water was as high as that auditorium wall over there. And they walk through. All night long, they're walking through. And God then says, now, stretch your hands again, and it comes down. And the Egyptians who wanted to annihilate, genocide the Israelites, God dealt with himself. There are trials in our lives. They're biggies, some are small, they're irritations. But you and I sometimes are so busy and in a hurry, we don't take time to really think through, maybe God is doing something really profitable in my life. Amen? The lesson for you and me is simple. We need to trust, have faith in the Lord as we encounter difficulties, those detours that seem to take us out of the path we intended, because God has something for us that we didn't even know we needed. pray with you.